First of all, I think you can hear me quite well. Awesome. So first of all, thank you for inviting me here. I think it's quite exciting to be here for one specific reason. When Bitpanda started out a little more than 10 years ago, this was a niche market. It was like an idea of buying cryptocurrencies, and one of the most important things our founders came up with is buying Bitcoin is so difficult, storing it is so difficult. It's sometimes kind of you had very able to buy them over the mail or something like that. There wasn't like a great institutional way to do it. And Bitpanda came out and said they wanted to change it, make it easy, make it accessible. And still being a niche market meant people like you in the Steam part were not thinking about how enforcement and insolvency is working on it because it wasn't relevant enough. And over the years, the industry has grown. And now we make this thinking about this because we realize that Bitcoin and the other currencies are not just some made-up money some people still might believe, but they are now a small minority. But the majority of us realize that this is a technology that is for the future and is even now here and provides relevant value that needs to be enforced and needs to be safe in currency and insolvency. So thank you for doing this, and thank you for also elevating this industry of this work. I have a little bit of three topics we have to do in Bitpanda around that, but I think we're going to have a short roundtable afterwards if there are more questions around that. First of all, we have three stages from Bitpanda view: investigations, request for information, and confiscation. So that's the things we are working on. We have our own department that really is doing that. Coming up to investigation. So what does this mean? Where does it come in place? We usually have three things that are starting. The first is actually a customer contacts us. The second is maybe it contacts the police first, the police comes to us. And the third is we find ourselves silly. That is not fair, it's not relevant. So what could that be, what we find or others find, that could lead to the actions? So first, the biggest thing is investment scams overall. That's a thing that rolls over each industry. We had it with gold, we had it with certain bankings, we had it with everything. And whenever a topic is high level relevant, what happens is that scammers use this. So that's often something where then people come to us and ask, hey, what happened, my money's gone. Or sometimes the police comes and say, hey, do you have this account there? Is the money still there? Sorry enough, those people understand very much that Bitpanda isn't a well place for this. So we have quite good relationship with the different police departments. They say in the dark web it's already known that Bitpanda is in place to keep these kind of things. So they tend not to do that, and we often have to say, no, it's not there, the customer is not there, or this uses. Then we have the mess-like promises of topics where people transfer money out. It's similar to an investment scheme, but more well done. And the last thing is money move systems. So basically that's an interesting case where suddenly the users are actually scammers themselves because they give away their identity data to provide this kind of information to gurus and managers. So, for whatever the reason is, we are now on the plan, we have an investigation team, we look at it. So what we do, and that comes back to what I said in the beginning, and that's where this legal topics is all coming forward is, while as a lawyer, you guys will probably more look at the legal background of things, we also need to look at the practical information of how do I find this. So, of course, the easy way is basically you go somewhere and do you have the client, but the client is not the only key factor here. Our wallets are not connected to a person per se. So what we do is we use different tools. One of them is the one that we use, image analysis, and we start analyzing this kind of transfers to see where it is going. So that sometimes we do a lot of it automatically. Or we support the investigations of the police and say, oh, while we don't have it, look, it might be there. And therefore helping enforcement to say, okay, while it's not with us anymore, it might be somewhere else where you could try to find and get there. In this case, it's a money rule case. Also then implements where we are finding cases where basically we have an exchange with a little old people sending them out there. So theoretically, if you would just look at that, which is actually the way bankings would work, it's the simple network wouldn't allow one, we can look for them and say, oh, why would all these people send there and then all of them there? Again, finding ways, and again, surfing and supporting police enforcement to access them and find the nodes and know who could that be connected with in the supporting messaging. Then we also see this kind of topics on low and unsimilar but very similar transactions. Again, finding this way. What I want to say is the difference to the classical investment processes is in this world I have different tools to investigate. And interestingly, in some cases we can go much further, as with the blockchain we are able to follow more lengthily than others do. And we do that. And a good company, as Bitpanda has departments who are specializing on that and supporting them. Does it mean that everybody who is scammed, we can get their money back? No, you cannot serve and support those who are actually doing these kind of things with the different tools sets. So coming away from all these kind of investigations, the question then that is, now we get more official, it's an official request for information. So sometimes they might just call and then they want it officially. So we all know, and we probably read more about that, especially worldwide, on how this request of information can be done. Don't want to bore you with that. There are ways for them to access and request information. But what's a little bit more interesting is the practical view from my perspective. Again, what we as who work with the police departments is that there are two different kind of requests. For one we can have and one we might not, is what kind of information we need to work effectively on getting this request. Like IP addresses, they sometimes come up and say, I have this IP address, now you find them, and we say, no, that's not how this works. We educate them a lot about what kind of we need, depending on timestamps and so on. The next things what we try to find to get them and have them understand that in enforcement, when we find things, what I really need is device identifiers, push tokens. These are things that are more reliable, we have more of them on case, and with these things we can find things more effectively. Accurate identification parameters, that's something we really sometimes work with, is that to educate that what they need to find. Because enforcement lives also from what the police actually does. Now, police forces often, and at various degrees of possibilities, are able to go in and find a stick. But what do they do with the stick? What is it helpful? What other devices and information do we need to gather to find information that can connect via images or data? That sometimes goes over that it's just our clients. It really goes over and saying, okay, look, if you could use this tool or use this information, you can go further. Then we have, of course, GDPR rules. We can't just give anybody some information. So that comes where the connection to the legal department is very well part of it, where in a way we need to identify, can we now allowed to give that information. We are very careful with user information, so we don't just give out anything to anybody. Then bulk data requests, that's a huge one, and that's something that's going to be, I see something that's in the future is becoming more and more, especially tax departments tend to think, oh, how about you give me your clients? And we say, no, not happening. This is a constant topic where also to educate them very clearly what are we allowed to do and what are we willing to do in any case. Because just giving out them because they might think the client is having more money than he tends to be, that is not that's not a tenable reason for us alone that they need to come up with more than to find it and not to say I want all your clients. B2B encryption, again, that's a big one that we find more and more on the practical level, is that they don't always understand the way that what we give them we will only do in some certain encryption way. Again, in educating way. Again, transaction data, they sometimes send over and think you can identify them. Again, trying to educate them on that. So we have all this information, but what happens then? Then they suddenly, sometimes they really come back and say, oh, okay, we want to confiscate. So there is like the three key effects there. The first is the easy, of course, freezing. Not giving the client any access anymore. The second is confiscation, which is more long-term in our case. So usually we always start with freezing. Basically, they come back and say we want this frozen. And then they come back in some of those cases and say, okay, we really want you to take them off there in the cases, which usually comes in different, more detailed discussions. So in that point, you usually are more coming back and forth with requests of information. We have an ongoing exchange about what we are supposed to do exactly, how things are going, and they usually wanted to have a lot of information at that time there to make there. Last but not least, and I think that's a lot of them where the book also then really gets going, is the transfer. So basically, where one of two things might happen. They want us to sell it and give it to somebody, send it to them, or they want the assets themselves. That depends on the asset, that depends on the reason they want to enforce that, and the possibilities. That's where we are then in the active exchange to really make the details of this work. Especially selling at a certain time is of course not without tricks, not without complications. As we know, they have a high range of what they could be worth at one moment and another. So we did have some cases where actually the scammed got a good deal because of the value the asset had at the moment. That's not the often case. Don't get scammed, please. And hope for the best. Just buy them yourself and hope for the best instead of getting scammed, because the chance is very low. But we did have a couple of cases where they went. Then what is of course the topic on where do we transfer them, this monies in, and how to make it happen. A lot of police stations and courts don't have actually a wallet system, but they do get now better with that. So that they are able to recover the asset themselves instead of a liquidated one there. That is a little bit on that. I hope you are gonna get this new book then futurely here too. But what I wanted to kind of conclude and finalize in here is working on enforcement is so important because it will allow us to be part of the overall financial industry, and it allows us to make sure that in those cases something happens, some queries go on, we have a correct legal way in there, and especially in an international setup. Right now, we are still very focused on the different countries, Germany, Austria, specific for us, but also France, Spain, and the others. But in the future, with more and more internationalization and more clients having these assets, means more clients have issues. This kind of work is really very important, and I'm very thankful for this.